Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Cintra webinar today, which is called Overcoming Global Payroll and HR Challenges. We will just give it a few more moments, another 30 seconds or so, just for anybody else who might be a little bit late joining, and then we'll kick off. Okay, so we'll get started. Thank you very much for giving up what I'm sure is your very precious time out of your businesses to join this webinar. We do massively appreciate it. So we'll start off with just a couple of introductions. My name is Helen Gray, and I am the International Head of Sales. So as I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of Cintra and have your UK payroll business with us. We have a UK side to the business, and we also have an international arm to the business, and I look after the sales side of the international side of the business. I'm going to hand you across to Merrin Roberts, and I'll get Merrin to introduce herself.
Thank you, Helen. So I head up the international HR team at Cintra Global. So we look after all our clients' HR needs beginning to end, and we'll run through that during this webinar shortly in any case. But I've been with Cintra Global for a couple of years now. My background is very much global HR and generalist HR as well. So I've been there and seen it all, really.
Thank you, Merrin. Before we actually start going through these slides, we're going to ask you to take part in a little poll, and this should be popping up on your screen. Should be on the right hand side. So what we want to know, what we're interested in, is: do you already use a global payroll solution? Have you already expanded into international markets? So all we're looking for is either yes, you have already, no, not yet, or you're possibly thinking about doing it, which may be why you're actually attending this webinar today. So if you could go ahead and answer that now, please. So we've got one person at the moment who hasn't used any kind of global payroll solution so far. A couple of you that have already, which is great.
Okay, a real mix through there, aren't we?
We have got a real mix. We'll just hang on another few seconds, see if there's any more answers to come through. Okay. All right. So as Merrin said, there's quite a mix of answers there. I think before we actually go into the slides, what I wanted to talk about first of all is if you haven't thought about expanding internationally, why would you look to actually do that? What are the pros of expanding internationally? So, you know, you might already be really thriving in the domestic market that you're in currently. I think probably the main pluses around expanding internationally, first thing is the lower operational costs. So obviously, depending on the country that you're expanding into, it's often a lot lower operational costs on the business. You're reaching out to a much, much wider audience. So therefore, you're going to have increased sales. Often when we are talking to prospects, they talk about wanting to access new talent. And, you know, a lot of the talent overseas have more diverse education and language skills than what you would have here in the UK. And then I think lastly, and probably the most important one, is reputation. So this helps to build your brand recognition. it helps attract new customers, and it really does set you apart from the competition. So that's just a little bit around why you would be looking to expand into global markets. So we'll now move on to the first slide, which is what the actual, what this webinar is about today. If we can just move on to that first slide. Okay, so global payroll and HR challenges. These are what we see and what we hear from customers day in and day out are the main challenges that they face. So the first challenge is around operational inefficiencies. You may already have experience of working with local providers in certain countries. You may be doing payroll in-house yourself and using multiple spreadsheets. And if you are doing that, it's incredibly difficult if you're in more than one country to get a holistic view of what your payroll costs are across those multiple countries. It can be a huge drain on your resource. If you think about the service levels that you will get from each of those in-country providers that you are working with, they can differ vastly from country to country. And again, it's just a huge drain on your resource, where it might, you might only need one person looking after that. If it's multiple countries, it could be a team of 3-4 people within your organization. So it's very fragmented. Merrin, the next one, which is around the battle to hire the best talent, you're best placed to talk to our audience about that.
Absolutely. So what we see with our clients is they've identified a new region, a new country to expand into. And then the key issue is, how do they make themselves as attractive as possible for candidates and for retaining any talent that they do hire? That's very, very difficult to do unless you know an accurate compensation package, unless you know the right level of benefits in country, etc. And it can be really difficult to go into this country without any of that knowledge or information. Say you've got a UK pension offering that might be incredibly competitive back in the UK. Is that competitive internationally? And we see such a huge variation in terms of salary and benefits packages. And it's really, really difficult to determine the right level to go into a market at, particularly for startup companies and organizations that may not have a huge amount to kind of splurge and splash on these benefits. That benchmarking piece is really quite important to ascertain the right level for you, so you are attracting those individuals into your business.
That's great. Thank you, Merrin.
No
The
problem.
next one is around ensuring compliance. Again, this is one, every prospect customer that we talk to, this is probably their biggest worry when you're looking to expand internationally, is how do you ensure that you stay compliant? And the local compliance varies massively from country to country. It's a minefield. If you take, for example, tax laws in France, they are very, very different to the tax laws in Germany. You have certain countries where income tax isn't applicable. You have other countries where the tax is based on your residency. There are other countries where income tax is based on your citizenship. And getting this wrong can have huge consequences. And that isn't to scare anybody. It is the fact that, if you get anything wrong in payroll, even in the UK, and I'm sure you know yourself around compliance law in the UK, late submissions, getting anything wrong can incur fines. And that's something that here at Cintra Global, that we want to take that stress away from you. The next
sorry, Helen, I'm just going to jump in from a HR perspective, because of course this is an incredibly important piece of HR, and it's really key that clients know about having locally compliant employment contracts, locally compliant policies, knowing the right processes for certain situations that they might come across, and having these things in local language. Most countries will require all the employee documentation to be in local language, though there are some exceptions to that. Above and beyond that is the things that you might not know that you need, even be aware that you need to know. So, for example, in Germany, all these documents need to be signed in wet ink. They can't be signed on DocuSign, and having those intrinsic details, it's a bit of a minefield. And again, very much as it is with payroll, not to scare everyone, but there are high liabilities and potential reputational damage if you don't get these things right. I'll pass back to you, Helen, about the next element.
Thank you. So the last point around global HR and payroll challenges is, how do you know that you're finding a service provider which is scalable? So, you might be a business that has quite aggressive growth plans over the next few years. And there are certain local providers that just aren't set up to deal with that kind of scale. We deal with businesses who have started off with 5 employees in Poland, and within a space of a year, they're up to 80, 90 employees. So what you don't want to be doing is being in a situation where that service provider comes back to you and says, we can't cater for that volume of employees, and you need to then go and find another provider. We constantly do reviews with our local providers that we work with to ensure that whatever solution that we use, whoever we work with, they can scale in line as your business starts to grow. So you never have to worry that you need to be moved with another provider. We will always ensure that that local provider that you are working with can scale in line with your business growth. Merrin.
Yes, so moving on, we're going to have a quick look at kind of the more traditional approaches where we see or have seen companies go through this kind of global expansion, and some of the downsides to these as well. And they absolutely have positives, but it can be very difficult to work around. So firstly, when you're looking at a large global provider, there are some very, very big ones out there in the market. And what we tend to see is they can support with large headcounts. So you're looking at headcounts, employee numbers of 200 plus, and they'll offer very good service for those numbers. Where the difficulties come in is where you have a smaller and medium-sized headcount spread around multiple countries, or even in kind of one country. And you're not likely to get the hand-holding and trusted advisor service that you really require with those numbers. You're also unlikely to have one key contact and would have multiple support contacts depending on the country and requirement, which kind of then gives that admin burden that you would have if you're trying to manage it yourself as well. So that can be some of the difficulties, certainly when you're looking at those smaller headcount aspects. Another service which is quite popular is EOR. It does differentiate from PEO, which you might have heard of as well. There are nuances between the two. And what you tend to see with these services is they're really, really good for hiring individuals fast and for very small headcounts. So say you need one headcount in Puerto Rico within the next week. Those services really come into their own in that element. The difficulty with it, though, is you're having to deal with tighter regulations in certain countries, because a lot of countries are really starting to crack down on these services. And they're also not built for higher headcounts. So you're not going to be able to do tailored and personalized benefits. You're not getting the autonomy that comes with them being a direct hire. And there's also kind of the cultural piece as well. A lot of individuals get quite nervous about being hired by a company that isn't the company they interviewed with. And this is a whole separate topic that I could talk about for hours. So I'm not going to go into too many details. But those are some of the kind of really key things to take into mind when looking at that service. The other way, of course, is doing it DIY. So you can manage all these local providers yourself. It is quite time consuming and there's quite a lot of admin involved in this. So it can become incredibly overwhelming when you're trying to handle and manage multiple providers yourself. You'll get a lot of information thrown at you, and then you're having to manage the standard of service which you expect to. It's kind of where you see some individuals that are very, very good at this, but what we see is individuals that are under time pressure. They don't want to send out 10, 15 different payroll amounts to different providers, manage the pay dates and things, and it can get very, very complex. And you also don't get the benefit of having kind of the service that you would get as a large provider, a large client of these providers that we can do ourselves. And we'll go into the solutions on the next slide in any case. But if anyone does have any questions kind of about the more traditional approach versus the new approach, there is a chat option on the right-hand side. So feel free to put any questions in as we go along, and we'll either address them as they pop up or towards the end of the presentation. So moving on to what makes Cintra Global different. We have a dedicated team that manage our local providers. So these providers are vetted to the highest of standards, they're frequently reviewed, and any feedback is addressed as a priority. So worst case scenario, if one of our providers isn't meeting the standard that we expect of them, then we'd look and would vet any new providers, but more importantly for yourselves and your employees, we'd ensure that transition was seamless with no negative impact. So as far as you're aware, nothing had particularly changed because we're managing that for you. And our team are incredibly good and incredibly efficient at doing that. We also coordinate all these in-country providers into one service. So we can give our clients the standardized service. The perfect example of this is that our clients only have to make one payroll payment through our platform. This is for all their employees, no matter what the country is. So rather than having to send out multiple amounts to different countries, different providers, it happens one time, once a month, and then we manage it from that point. So this is a huge benefit for our clients and ensures minimum admin and input from them, which is obviously a bit of a win, particularly when you're under those time pressures and you don't have that local expertise yourself. The other element that we offer is we offer an EOR service. So that is in addition to the direct hire payroll service that we provide. So right from the offset, when we're talking to a new client, we work as a trusted advisor with them, and we'll work with them to help them figure out if EOR or direct hire is the best model. And we will give you that information. This is completely free. We just want to make sure they're having the right delivery. So one of the things that we then do is we review this. So it doesn't go away, that trusted advisory piece. And one of the advantages of using us is as you grow, we will continue these conversations with you. And should it be deemed better to move from one to the other, we'll work with you to ensure a seamless transition without you having to find alternative providers, which is obviously a really, really big piece. And the key again is making sure there's as little impact on yourselves and your employees. So if you were to move from one point from EOR over to the payroll service, we'd be having those conversations with you really early on. We'd be talking about any changes to employment contract, if it was going to impact on anything in terms of the payroll, etc. And you're not having to find multiple different providers to do this and go through the transition piece for you. We have just had a note just asking about whether this is being recorded. We'll pick that up with the marketing team at the end and we'll reach out to you. So moving on to the next slide, and I'll pass back to Helen here.
Thanks, Merrin. So this diagram reinforces what Merrin has just been talking to you about. This is basically showing you, if you look on the left, if you weren't using Cintra Global, and it's showing the many strings of communication lines that you have with each of the local providers that you'll be working with. And then if you look on the right, if you are working with Cintra Global, you will see that you have got that single point of contact with Cintra Global. And it's just a very good visual representation of the difference between you having lines of communication with each of those providers, and if you move across to a provider like us, it takes all of that away for you. Okay, so this slide, and you might, I'm sure you're already, probably most of you, well aware of the products and services that we provide here at Cintra Global, but I want to quickly take you through them. We have two, what I would call core products, which you've already heard about. We're going to talk to you in the next couple of slides a little bit more in depth around our global payroll solution and our global HR solution, which Merrin will take you through. Over and above that, we have other complementary services. So the first one to the right of Cintra Global there is legal entity setup. Depending on the size of the business that you are setting up, how many heads you are setting up with, whether it has a sales focus, will decide whether you require a legal entity to be set up or not. If you do require a legal entity set up, then we provide a very comprehensive service from start to finish to get you set up in that country. Below that, we have employer of record. And again, Merrin's already touched on that. We now provide an employer of record service directly. So previously, if you joined us 6 months ago, we worked with various partners who provided employer of record services. We want to give you at Cintra Global a complete solution, kind of what you would call a cradle to the grave solution. So where you may start off on employer of record, as your headcount starts to increase, often employer of record isn't scalable due to the fees associated as you start to really increase your headcount. If that does happen, then you know that whilst we can provide that service initially, we then may move you, and it might be the right thing to move to an outsourced global payroll managed solution, which is what we're going to talk about in a moment. So we can provide both, which is great. At the top right there, you will see our expansion advisory service. We have a huge wealth of experience here at Cintra Global, who will provide you with expansion advice. You know, when you are starting out on this global journey, you don't know what you don't know. And with a lot of the larger global organizations, you don't always get that hand-holding advice at the very beginning to talk to you about which are the best markets to go into, which are the countries to avoid, talk to you around the compliance side of it, what you need to think of, even talking to you about, do you start with employer of record? You don't need a legal entity, but it would be better if we set you up and we register a subsidiary of your business in that particular country. So again, it's a bit of a minefield, but we have in-house experience to be able to talk you through what you should be doing and give you some really good sound advice on that. Last but not least is our expense management software. So we have a fantastic expense management platform called Capture Expense. Nearly everybody who whether you're working in the UK or you're working overseas, especially if it's a sales environment, not even a sales environment, probably any vertical that you work in, you will be required at some point to do your expenses. And this expense platform is probably, and I've worked in this industry for years and years and years, and I've worked with many of these platforms, expense management platforms. Capture Expense by far is the easiest, simplest, most intuitive platform that you can use for expense management software. So that's something that's pretty new to our portfolio. And once we've obviously finished this webinar, if anybody wants to discuss expense management, we'll be reaching out to everybody and we can have further conversations with you on that as well. So that pretty much sums up, I would say, the core services that we offer here. So I'm now going to talk to you specifically around our managed payroll service, which, as I said, is our core product. So these are the steps that we go through. This is essentially the service description for this particular product, I would call it. So we will set you up in that country, as I said, whether, if you don't require a legal entity and we just need to register you in that country as a subsidiary of your main headquartered business, we will do that setup for you. We will do all of the employee onboarding and offboarding services. We make sure that you have all compliant payroll documents, obviously depending on the country that you are in, and it differs from country to country. We will provide you with full payment management. So we partner with a company called Convera, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of. You don't have to use our payment platform, But if you want to use our payment platform, they're a fantastic company to work with very competitive rates. So we can provide that service too. That is at no extra charge either. So when we provide you with quotations for our managed payroll service and you decide to use Convera to make the payments to your employees, that is all inclusive in the fees that we give you. We will provide you with centralized records and reports. So we will take you through, if you decide to come with Cintra Global for your global payroll needs, we will do a demonstration on our platform. I think Merrin mentioned it earlier, called IPEX. And we are able to produce centralized records and reports for your global payroll needs. And then last but not least, again, we've already talked about this, but the payroll compliance filings, whatever is required in that particular country, we will do all of those filings for you, so you don't have to do anything. This is a very, very hands-off service for you as a customer. We take care of everything. All you are really doing is, at the start of the journey, is there's a data gathering exercise that you will need to do to get your employees set up in IPEX. And then after that, it is just, changes in payroll, as in absences, etc., which I'm sure you're very used to in your UK payroll. And it's exactly that same process on the global side.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time and I don't want to rush through the HR piece, but I do want to leave some time for questions. What I'll say is, if anyone wants any kind of in-depth information about HR, reach out to myself, to Helen, the marketing team, and we'll have those conversations with you and I can talk about this a bit more in depth. Essentially, the key thing to know about our HR offering is that you get to own the strategy and we do all the hard work. So we provide everything from standard templates for you that you can just take away and manage if you want to the tailoring of those documents, and then really the employee life cycle beyond that. So our HR offerings broken into some very clear kind of offerings, some buckets as we call them. So the first one is really the onboarding, where we get those template documents provided to you. We set up any collective bargaining agreements. We advise you on employee classification. We provide you with template handbook, etc. So it's really all encompassing. So you've got the bare bones, really, not the bare bones, kind of the groundwork in which to kind of move forward with that expansion in country. We then offer our HR admin and support, and that's really the catch-all for anything else that falls outside of it. So it's the tailoring, it's the giving you advice on policies, it's the random questions that pop up that you have no idea where to begin to answer those. We'll provide you with that compliant advice. We then, of course, provide enhanced benefits, which are incredibly popular at the moment. They're a hot topic right now internationally, so we will do those setups for you and again manage the providers for you, very similar to how the payroll team works. And then alongside that, we can do everything from benchmarking to providing you with template engagement surveys, really anything that you might think of from a HR perspective. We also have an amazing relationship with in-country legal counsel. So worst case scenario, if you have any contentious issues popping up, then we'll refer you straight to them so you know that you're getting that expertise, advice and guidance. So I'm going to leave it there for HR with 1 minute to spare, which I know doesn't give any time for questions. But if anyone has any questions, just pop them in. Helen, I know that we did have one come in prior to this call, which was just in relation to how do we actually ensure that we're being compliant in both payroll and HR. So from the HR piece, what we do is we do annual audits and we do regular updates on any documents. So say there's a legislative update that's relevant to one of the templates that we have given you, then we will update those and notify our clients. It's also covered in newsletters and blogs. So you're really getting inundated with information, if nothing else. And then those annual audits catch anything that might have fallen outside of that. So we're really, really hot on this. We have to be by nature of it. And Helen, I don't know if you quickly want to address the payroll piece.
It's pretty much exactly the same on the payroll side. So we do frequent reviews with all of our local providers. We make sure that we are always compliant. It's not something that you ever have to worry about. If there is one reason and one reason only why you decide to come with a managed outsourced payroll provider, it is the comfort that you know from a compliance point of view. We will never, ever put you at risk of not being compliant. We have regular checks with all of our local providers. So that it's just something that you never need to be concerned about.
Brilliant. I think we're done for time. But as I said before, if you have any questions or want to reach out to teams, got the sales email at the bottom of the presentation, but you can reach out to myself directly as well, and I'm more than happy to answer any HR bits and pieces that you might want to send my way.
Thank you, Merrin. And yes, same for me. If you want to reach out to me to discuss any of your global payroll needs, if you just want to have a discussion, informal discussion, and talk about, you know, that expansion advisory service that we do, please feel free to reach out. And I think all that's left to say is thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. And I hope you've enjoyed what you saw today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.